Hey, everybody, welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Here's tonight's question. Who pays the price if you misread a situation? This podcast exists for one reason: clarity. Clarity about violence, clarity about responsibility, and clarity about what it actually means to be prepared. This is not a show about fighting. It's not about aggression, dominance, or even just tactics. It's about judgment under pressure, restraint when force is justified, and responsibility for consequences of action and inaction. My name is Greg LaBeouf, and I have spent over 3 decades working with men who face violence professionally and men who face it unexpectedly in ordinary lives. But I'm also a father and a husband, and like many of you, I've watched the world change faster than most people are willing to admit. This podcast isn't here to scare you, but it's also not here to reassure you. It's here to help you think clearly about situations that do not allow time for thinking. If you're looking for shortcuts, hyper entertainment, this is probably not for you. But if you believe preparation is a responsibility, not an obsession, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Okay, so tonight's podcast is decision making versus strength. And I think, just to kind of set this up, I think obviously strength is visible, right? We can see strength, we can see it in action, we can see it through different means, but strength is very tangible and visible. Decision making, especially decision making under pressure, is not so tangible. Now, you can see, we can all see when somebody, I guess this is maybe an opinion, but if somebody makes a bad decision under pressure or hesitates or makes no decision, the consequences become visible. I guess sometimes from an outside perspective, again, it's the results that become visible when decision making goes awry, whereas strength is very, very tangible. And I think that, or like visible. And I think that the bigger way to think about this for the topic tonight is that strength is also tends to be admired, right? And that's the other way that I meant when I decided to do this topic, that strength is visible. It's because we see strength, like we can see force, you can see speed, you can see power, and those things are often admired, obviously within the context of being a protector, which is what we're concerned with, but also just being a fighter. We've talked about this before, and one of the paradigms that most people have is that, well, who's the toughest guy in the room? Well, let's just find who the biggest guy is, right? Who's got the biggest muscles? Who's the tallest? Who's the heaviest? All that type of stuff. Who's got the combination of those: biggest, strongest, most athletic, all that type of stuff. That guy's the best fighter. So strength is visible. Decision making is not. And I think that, especially decision making under pressure, and that's what I want to break down in tonight's podcast. So I don't know if you guys have any visceral opening, kind of thoughts or comments on that, but that's a little bit of the setup. If you guys do, throw those in right now, and if not, then I'm gonna or say what you want to say, and then I'll kind of give us a little bit deeper direction. So, is there anything you guys have that you kind of just viscerally want to talk about?
Viscerally, yeah, viscerally for me is that almost just tying in a little bit of what you're saying is that that's a visible thing, and that's what most people see, and I think it's also what most people train. And like when you're weaponizing and when you're talking about decision making, there's a lot more to being that protector for yourself and your family than just the physical. And we've talked lots about that previously, but I just wanted to, like, that for me, like, that's something that there's a lot of depth to how to train that decision making, train your inner control box, and all of the mental fortitude and toughness that is part of the process as well. But that's all stuff that people can't see.
Yeah, 100%. Dustin, anything?
Yeah, very quick. I think one thing, the thought I had, when I first listened to it was very much a status-based society. So I think a lot of people, not so much us, but a lot of people are all about like what kind of car you drive, what kind of watch do you wear, what kind of clothes do you have, sort of house do you live in, blah 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 blah. And so I think the whole strength versus like ability to make decisions kind of falls into that same cultural kind of realm. And so I think for me, it's just like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think most people would agree with that opening statement that, yeah, it's two very different things. And a lot of the credit is often given to strength, which is often mistaken as tough and on from there. So
Yeah.
lots to unpack, but that was my first thought.
Yeah, no, it's good, and I agree with that. And I just something that hit me just when you each kind of had your little input here was that I think we could tie age into this too. Like
Yeah.
we see when you're young and strong and powerful, well, that's who our protectors are in our society. And as you get older, people go, well, this guy's what, in your 60s, like he or 70s or 80s, like where for us, we've talked about this often, where at what age do you retire from taking on the responsibility to protect yourself? Yes, we change, attributes change, things change, but that is also part of the power of tonight's conversation in that, what is more valuable? Is it the strength and the things that come with that, or is it the ability to make good decisions under pressure? Like, and that'll just segue me into kind of maybe the next point, which is, and people kind of have to ask themselves whether they believe this is true or false statement, and to what degree they believe that this statement is true or false. And that is, the outcome of most violent encounters is rarely determined by the person that is the strongest. And so again, is that true? Is that false? And there's always exceptions to every rule, but I absolutely believe that that is true. And there's other elements. It's not just a two-horse race. It's not just, who wins a violent encounter. Is it the strongest, or is it the person that makes the best decisions? There's other factors. There's who has the element of surprise, like who has the initiative, maybe how many, like numbers, weapons, time. There's lots of different factors that can go into that. But we are talking about decision-making versus strength. And so that question or that statement of, rarely are they determined by the strongest, for me personally, I believe that is true. And then of course you guys can weigh in on that, and I'll set up the next context of this. If we're going to have a discussion about strength versus decision making, then let's clarify a little bit to help us set some parameters on for this conversation. I think one of the things that you have to talk about is like, you talk about making decisions under pressure. We have to talk about thinking clearly. And so, I think there's this thing that like, most people would aspire to say, I have to think clearly. Where what I would submit for this conversation is that this is not as black and white as just, are the attributes of strength, like, power, speed, strength, like the things that are more visible and tangible, athleticism, all that type of stuff. The technique even, right? Let's put that in under the strength. This guy, you're watching a guy hit the heavy bag or focus mitts, or you're watching him fight in a ring and you're just like, holy geez, like this guy's a specimen. That's all your strength. Then we're saying, okay, well, decision making under pressure, that is what we're comparing it to. But to even maybe take a scalpel to that a little bit more, I think where a lot of people get confused is I'm like thinking clearly actually for me is not, there's two parts to it. And thinking clearly actually would be a misnomer to believe, to say just that, because violence, one of the main qualities is that time collapses when you experience violence. And so you guys know this to be true, and just let me try to paint maybe a clear picture. When you go from just living your life and you're doing whatever you're doing, maybe it's just at home, you're asleep, and some next thing you know, somebody's in your house, or you're out and you're just taking your kids to a hockey game or to a movie, or you're driving home. The initiative is almost always with the bad guy. We're not out there looking for conflict. We're just living our lives. So when they have the initiative, when they initiate the assault, it's on their timeline. And so there is almost always a period of when that initiation hits, time collapses. And you guys have done hundreds of hours of scenario training where you can go into a scenario, a very well done, realistic, three-dimensional, like you're in real world environments, where you're walking into a scenario going, I'm here to do a scenario. So it's either going to be tactical or non-tactical. I have to make those decisions. But you can go in going, hey, you're primed a bit, right? Yes, somebody in this room or multiple people might attack me. Like this is the scenario. And yet when it starts to happen, and have you guys ever experienced time collapse? Okay, so again, you walk into a scenario, you're already primed, And then all of a sudden, the second that the threat starts to reveal itself, which could happen, fairly quickly or, even over 5 to 10 seconds, but time alters. And, you just get, I'm not even 100% sure in the words that I would use because I don't want to say that it starts happening too fast, but the second the threat becomes real, there is a shift in the perception of time. Let's just start with that. Have you ever experienced that in a scenario?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
for
what
sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so well, yeah. Maybe just describe it real quick. Just what that feels like from your perception.
Yeah, I
it's
think
going
like,
for you. Yeah,
sorry.
you go, you're good.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it go both ways, to be perfectly honest, depending on where I was in my training and all of that and everything else. But there's no question. I think just as you come online to a threat, like just the way what you're perceiving with all your senses, of course. But I think because everything just becomes so critically aware of something that you deem to be so critically important, because you're essentially dealing with something that's like a life or death type situation, just the way you start processing information, it changes because it's everything, your life depends on it. And I think just the way that the brain naturally lights up to sort of, take in as much information as it can, try to sort through like what's critical, what isn't critical, that's going to skew the timeline that you're normally used to operating at. And it can really, I think, kind of muddy the water as to how much time really is passing, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. Yep.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, because just echoing it really for the most part, but processing all that information and all that stimulus that's happening in those moments, but then also kind of like what we're kind of talking about is that decision making. But it's like, well, what do I do with that information? How do I respond to that information? So it's not just that there's information in front of us, but we also so there's a lot of moving parts, and that's where I think we could think that there's that skew in time or the timeline because it's like you might be taking an action and there's going to be that gap. We already know that there's those mental Kodak moments, but then it's like there's all those things that happen under the combat stress and the decision making and the stimulus. There's just a lot of variables that are happening all at once.
Yes. Okay. So the three of us can sit here and we can say that even though we've been training 30 something years, you guys are close to 30 years, like we've been training a long time. And yet, when you go into a scenario where you are primed for that, it is a scenario. And although the scenario can have a lot of intense pressures, and there is some consequences in a scenario, like injury, pain, all that type of stuff, it's there. But you're not life and death. Okay. Yet you can still have this sensation. You can create the real world stress response inside of a human being. Now, imagine a human being that has less training, less experience, less exposure. Well, theoretically, it's even easier. Well, not theoretically, practically, it's easier to create that stress response to get time to collapse. So, what I want to put forward is that time collapse is just a part of the stress that is involved in protecting yourself or your family. Now, does it mean that it's going to be there all the time? Is time going to collapse every single time? No. But let's explore that. The goal is not to have this powerful decision-making skill set. Like you can't just look at it and go like, well, we're weighing the benefits of strength and attributes and all those tangible things to just the ability to make good decisions. Because there's going to be a moment when you're going to have decision collapse. Does that last for a second or two? Does it last for 10 seconds? It just depends on a lot of different factors. But what I would say for the most part is that actually what I believe people need and that what really determines the outcome of most violent encounters is that the first and most important thing is not strength and it's not thinking clearly. I think both those things are secondary and we'd have to organize those. I believe actually strength comes in third, but I believe the number one most important thing is to respond clearly. And just to clarify that, when someone says, like in your training, I'm teaching you to think clearly under pressure, that is great, providing that the pressure that you face is low enough that you can keep your logical brain activated. We've also all been in all the scenarios you've done. Have you ever gone into a scenario where the people, like, someone's feeding you the scenario and it goes physical. It's a tactical scenario, but it's a low level threat. Like it's a 2 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10. Still requires you to physically defend yourself, to make decisions, take actions, all that stuff. But it didn't get the hair on the back of your neck to stand up. It didn't cause vasoconstriction. S&S always activates when there's a threat there, even the perception of a threat, but the activation was so minimal that you literally could handle the situation while thinking about what you were going to the store to get. Oh, I don't forget, I got to get some milk once I'm done dealing with this. Do you get what I mean? So have you ever experienced that where the pressure is so low, your experience, your training, all that stuff, that you actually could think clearly? So I'm assuming yes. I'm going to have seen it, but
well, yeah, I think that's a sign of good quality training. I mean, if you've never had that, then there's something wrong with your training. You know what I mean? Like hands down.
Okay.
And just to speak to the point before that about the idea of having to think your way through it is like, well, that's why I train, so I don't have to think. Do you know what I mean? Because when there's, as you just said it, as the pressure goes up, the ability to think actually literally goes away. As the blood drains out of your forebrain, you just literally can't think the same way, which is why having a motor program, already on board is so critically important. So yeah, I think you train so you don't have to think.
Okay. So I'll submit this on that, and then Brad, I'm going to let you go. You said that's why you train, so that you don't have to think. But I think even more accurately stated, it's because in the moments of time collapse, which happen in real high intense situations, you can't think. And that's the difference.
It's impossible.
Exactly. People actually think that no matter, you can train, and when you train, you can still think your way through every single situation. And it's like, no, you actually can't. I genuinely believe you can't. Even if you get into high level tier 1 guys that are like Navy SEALs, Delta guys, and things like that, we can all just, even if we don't know that much about them and their training methodology, we know enough, and we've been around enough guys that are tier 1 guys, that you can see how much pressure it would take to collapse time on them, but yet they'd be the first individuals to tell you that, oh man, it happens all the time. And so what happens is you have these time collapse moments where you are responding. And if your training is done well, the stimulus response, the responses that you have that are occurring without conscious thought process, right, are responsible, legal, sound, tactically, strategically, because the training has built in the right response to that stimulus. But there's still moments of time collapse. And then it's then the bridge, you get over that bridge, and then the cognitive function can fire back up. And of course, the higher level you are, the more stress it might take to get that to collapse. But time collapse is just a part of it. And that's why you have Kodak moments in intense situations. I remember clearly this, and then I don't remember the mid part. And then my next Kodak moment was this. And these snapshots might only be 2 seconds apart or half a second apart, but there is missing information that I don't specifically remember this or recall this. And yet then there's other sequences where over a 20-second period, you remember every single detail, because each second was like a year of your, it's its own memory. And for 20 seconds, you remember everything that happened. And this is like fast time motion, slow time motion, all these different things that are occurring because of the physiology. But I just wanted it to kind of separate those, because time collapse happens. So there's moments when you cannot think. So I didn't want this to just be a conversation about what is more important, the strength and the physical strength or the decision making. Because actually, I think what's even more important is to recognize that the most dangerous moments to us, not just on a physical front, but decisions where the consequences may follow you for the rest of your life or ruin your entire life. Those ones are often happening in the moments of time collapse. And so if your training's not preparing you for those moments of time collapse, if we're literally just saying, we're going to build you to be bigger, stronger, faster, better technique, all that stuff, and we're teaching you how to think clearly, because you're involved in this, you're learning to make good, sound, tactical decisions. Well, I think we're missing a realistic accurate part of what happens under high stress life and death situations, which is the time collapse, where you need response training. You need to respond clearly. And that's different because the logical brain is too slow, it's too plodding, it's burdened by logic. The logical brain, the thinking part of our brain, the rationalizing part of our brain has nothing to do with combat. It's not that you can't access it at a certain point after, but in the time collapse, it's the wild brain that's there, not the logical brain that's there. Sorry, Brad, I know you didn't get a chance to kind of put your 2 cents in yet.
Yeah, you know what? I think that point has been hit anyway. But one of the things that, when you think about a violent encounter, one of the things, obviously, there's times where you just can't think. You don't have the time to do that. And one of the things that is a factor in that is proximity. Mm-hmm. The closer that encounter is, that you're actually in that encounter, is you just can't think. It's just there's not enough time. It's already physically in. You're already physically in that situation. There's no distance between you and somebody else in that moment. That has a different type of time restraint, I believe. But even just having proximity, it's a simple thing, but it's like, yeah, the closer you are to somebody, and the actual engagement part of that is you're not thinking. You don't have time to think. Everything is happening so quickly. It's like it just doesn't happen. So that's, Dustin said, survival motor program, viscerally imparting, the responses into what happens in those situations. How do you deal with them with that energy or whatever that happens to be? So just I know a little bit of a side note, but
no, I think it's good. And I think that too, I would set up that if we look at, because we're saying, okay, strength versus decision making. Well, let's look at 2 aspects of failed decision making, and that is overreaction and hesitation. And those are 2 sides of the same failure. And so at this point, it's just, okay, we haven't even, like, it's almost like, so what you're supposed to be comparing strength versus decision making, and we've just been talking about decision making and breaking down decision making. You guys haven't really talked about strength. Okay, so let's look at the cleanest or the best, the most powerful techniques, the power, the speed, the attributes, the aggression, like all of these tangible things that people just think, they build themselves and they weaponize this human system of punches and kicks and ground fighting techniques and conditioning and all this stuff. What activates those things? Well, a decision. A decision has to activate those things. And so again, you can say, well, no, it could be a reaction. You're talking about time collapsing. And so just visually there's a response, and all of a sudden this jab snaps out or this double leg happens and you pick someone up and slam them on the ground. And then I would say, okay. And so the repercussions of picking a guy up and slamming him onto the concrete, or pulling a knife out and cutting him, or stabbing him, or, launching 7, 8 elbows into this guy. Okay, so if that's automated, then if the level of force doesn't meet the level of threat, now you're facing criminal charges. Yes, that guy started the fight. Yes, that guy was the instigator. And yes, that guy was a threat. But after the first elbow or the second you pick the guy up, he's no longer a threat, or you slam on the ground, one's no threat, then you drop. You get what I mean? So decision-making still outpowers or outweighs the importance of the strength, because the strength is like having a bullet or having the gun, but you have to make a decision as to what you aim that at and when you pull that trigger. So again, we say this all the time, but professionals take action or they respond, and amateurs react. So I know if you face an individual that has something as powerful as, let's say, a firearm, and they reactively discharge that firearm, probably some bad things are going to happen. The consequences are going to be immediate, and bad things are going to happen. And if somebody is in a reactive state like that, it's probably because time has collapsed on them, and maybe that's because they've been emotionally overloaded. I have a video the other day that just got sent to me to do a breakdown on, and there's a 35-year-old father, and they get in some sort of a road rage with another vehicle. Neither vehicle is damaged, but they both ended up, one's in the ditch and one's on the parked up on the shoulder. So whether one ran somebody off the road, it's unclear. But the video is probably 40 seconds, and 30 seconds out of that 40 seconds is the two of them standing about 20 feet apart. I mean, just absolutely screaming at each other, every expletive in the book. And then the camera, whoever's taking the film, it looked like whoever's property it was on, is walking, kind of is moving. So the camera comes off a bit. And then as the camera pans back up, now they're standing about 10 feet apart. And you just see all of a sudden the one guy lifts his shirt, pulls a firearm out. The guy sees it. The guy turns to run and he gets shot in the back 7 times and killed. Obviously, he's dead. But it's just like how fast, like you have this 35 or 30 seconds, and then you have a second or two where the guy clearly sees the gun. He has enough time to turn to run, and then the guy discharges the firearm, and the next 2-3 seconds of the video is just him being, him shooting 5 to 7 rounds or whatever it is. And so again, you just see this time collapse, and you just see this decision-making process from the very beginning of this is all wrong. You are reacting to the situation. Yes, there's something that happened that you're pissed off at. Now that's escalated to where vehicles are off the road. And now it's escalated to where you're out having confrontation. All of these things are decision points. And I guarantee you that this is a much longer incident than the 40-second video that I have. But it's like time, how long has that been going on? A minute, 2 minutes? It probably didn't feel like that. I guarantee their perception under that stress is definitely skewed and altered. And so, again, the physical action of him pulling the gun out and making the decision to shoot this guy, there's no way that this gentleman or this guy that pulled the gun out and shot this other man, there was no way he thought this guy was a threat. They were 10 feet apart. The guy made no moves to come at him. He wasn't trying to lunge at him. The guy, when he went to run away, you can clearly see the guy had a distinctive limp or hip problems or something, because this guy had no athletic movement. This guy couldn't move. He's only 35 years old, but this guy was not an athletic fighter, a dangerous man in that capacity. This guy reactively, emotionally got overloaded, time collapsed. He couldn't so again, people say, why would you shoot someone when they're not a threat? Because you don't have the logical brain. You have no access to the logical brain. Too slow, too plodding, too burdened by logic and reason. So he gets into this emotionally charged wild brain, the midbrain, the mammalian part of the brain, and he just literally executes this guy. So, if the conversation is literally about, strength versus, decision making, as we're doing, I think majority of the conversation being focused on what does it truly mean to have good bulletproof decision-making skill sets. And maybe I'm going to qualify that. I don't want to say bulletproof because that makes it sound like you can train to be infallible. And that's not true. I mean, right now, for the amount of experience you guys have and years of training, scenarios, all that type of stuff, myself included, I would not say that I know for a fact that I'm going to make the right decision under pressure. Training doesn't give you this gift of perfection or invincibility or anything like that. Matter of fact, it's almost the opposite. It exposes you to the realities and the true demands, and that's what keeps you training. What wakes you guys up and gets you to train that day? Is it like, I'm so awesome now, I'm just going to go a little bit better. I just want to be a little more awesome. I'm already such a badass. I just want to be a little bit more badass. No, the thing is, though, I can think of 100 ways that I find myself in a situation that is terrifying, overwhelming, virtually where I'm like, geez, I'm doing all this training just so I can regulate and give myself the best chance of making good, sound decisions, all that stuff, right? That's what keeps us motivated, is that it's extremely difficult to get it, quote unquote, to get it right. And it's an impossibility to be perfect, but you train your best so that, hopefully not only can you protect yourself, but you protect yourself from the consequences of your actions after. You got to get it right. Does that kind of track? So, yeah. So the hesitation The hesitation and overreaction to me is again what causes that. Well, it's time collapse. If there's a situation to which you can handle the pressure and you don't feel like you're in the logical brain, there's no blood loss from the forebrain, you're staying in control of things and all that type of stuff, you're not going to hesitate and you're not going to overreact. Like why would you overreact to a situation that, again, like just is easy to handle? So we come back to the importance of recognizing that it's not just decision making in terms of trained to think clearly. It is first and foremost get the right stimulus so that when there's a stimulus that you can't think your way through, that stimulus has a built-in response that is proportional to the stimulus. So stimulus response, stimulus response. So you condition that. That's what we talk about when you say you weaponize your startle flinches, you weaponize your reactions to things. You're inoculating against the stressor to the best of your ability. Okay, you know what I mean? So I don't know. For me, that's kind of really my biggest takeaways that I want people to have is that you have to break it into kind of three things. The physical part, the strength, the attribute stuff is very important, but I believe that your response training is the primary thing so that you understand what that means to be able to actually make decisions under pressure. That means that you are stimulus response training. You're right, operant conditioning. Then for the situations where you can either come back to, you've regulated, the survival motor program activates, and now you potentially can activate some reasoning, some logic, some thinking because you're gaining control. You got your footing in that situation. Now you're thinking clearly. And yet you still need, of course, the line familiarization, the references to understand all that stuff. But now you're thinking clearly, and those two things are what activate. Now you're directing the strength. So that to me would be my hierarchy, and that is a integral part of why I train the way I train, not what I train, but the way I train. Which is, and you guys can add your thoughts on this and how you do it. But when I go out, and I'm out this morning, and I'm working off my flashbang tactics and tools and eye shots, and I'm doing all of the different stuff that I'm doing, I never practice that without having first imaged clearly the stimulus that warrants the initiation of that strategy, tactic, and tool. And how many times have I taught that and preached that to you guys and everybody else that we train, is to make sure that you have the understanding of the stimulus. What's the problem? What's the stimulus? What is eliciting this response? Even if you're just out there on your own going, dude, all I want to do is get better at elbows. Or get better at throwing knees. I just want to get my technique better. I'm not a big believer in just practicing your knees. Under what context would you be delivering the knee or gouging the eyes or headbutting or pulling your knife or whatever it is? So I don't know. How does that sit with you guys and tie into how you feel about it?
Yeah, it makes me think of pressure just in general, like the stimulus being that amount of pressure. And when you're like, I think you kind of even alluded to it a little bit earlier in the podcast, was like, well, everybody boils at a little bit of a different temperature. But if you've had no exposure, then your boiling point is going to be and can be quite low. Obviously, there's predisposition and there's all those things that happen or that come into play and factor with it. But when you think about, when I think about training and I think about being able to handle pressure, right? What may get me overwhelmed and have time collapse today, hopefully doesn't have the same effect in 6 months to a year from now. I can handle more pressure, right? And something that could have been very much putting me in that time collapse now is something that I'm like, oh, I'm able to use response and decision and thinking and intellectual thought process in that moment, because that is no longer the threat stimulus that was affecting me the way it was previously, right? So I don't know. For me, I think that a lot of and that's not the physical, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a physical element to it, but it's like it's not the physical is not going to take me up the express elevator
Yeah.
to be able to handle more pressure, right?
That's right.
It is the mental, it is the inner control box, is being able to regulate when I have that pressure in front of me. The best and more efficient that I'm able to regulate my response to what's in front of me, the quicker I'm going to be able to get to that point where I can tap into that intellectual mindset or proper decision making in that moment and not be found in that time clocks, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for me, just an example I kind of thought of sitting here is, take it from violence into something else that maybe people can relate to, and then maybe it helps them understand things or clarify things a bit. Is if you take like a hockey player like Connor McDavid, and we go, okay, we got strength, right? So we're talking attributes. Clearly, the guy has amazing attributes. Nobody's really going to argue that. But you put Connor McDavid on a breakaway, and it's like, okay, I'm in net, right? That's a 0.02 difficulty out of 10 for Connor McDavid to score on me on a breakaway. He can think his way through it. He's not going to have time collapse.
Yeah.
He can literally just do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to watch what I'm doing. He's going to put the puck in the net. He's going to deliver. He doesn't have to rely on the strength. He's not dealing with time collapse. He can just think. But put like the best goalie in the NHL, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Put that guy in net. Put Connor on a breakaway. The strength alone isn't enough. Do you know what I mean? Like just the fact that he is really good isn't enough. He's not going to score just because he's really good.
Yeah.
He may or may not experience time collapse. Depends how good his inner control box is and all of that. But he's also doesn't have time to think. If he literally comes rushing across the line at that goalie and tries to think, well, maybe I'll just bring the puck over here and maybe I'll do this. Like that goalie's got him. Like he owns him.
Yeah.
He's not doing that. So it's all stimulus response. What's he training? Like how is he practicing breakaways? Stimulus response, stimulus response. He's thin slicing every micro motion that goalie makes. But he's not thinking about it. Yeah. He's not literally like, oh, I saw the goalie twitch this way, so I'm going to do this. He just literally responds. And I think people can understand that, hopefully. I think they can understand everything we talked about. But I don't know, to me, it's just like a different example of the exact same three kind of components. And hopefully that helps people.
Yeah, it does. And I think, again, the thing is like the physical is like, we always talk about it. Like if you're coming in for a job interview to be a lifeguard, they're not going to ask you if you can swim.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a prerequisite. Like, yeah, okay, you can swim. Yeah, okay. But everything else that they're looking for is to determine the qualities and the character and your ability to assess. To be able, like, you do not want a bunch of lifeguards that are waiting and unable to see pre-incident indicators until somebody's at the bottom of the pool, until somebody's already into like, they call it like, now we got to get wet. Good lifeguards are like good bodyguards, right? They do all of their action as early as they can on the front end, and so that they don't have to get into the physical scuffle, they don't have to get wet to rescue people. And so it's decision-making skill sets. For the context of what we're talking about, the stimulus response, the operant conditioning, I think is massive, because if your training is just going, we're going to train you to such a level that you never experience time collapse, well, then you're not really training for any type of that. How do you really argue that you're training for a life and death or righteous fight? Like you're training for a situation that may not be winnable. It may only at best be survivable, and that may still cost you. That type of situation, that type of righteous, intense situation, you're going to experience time collapse. So you have to have the stimulus response training so that you can respond clearly. And then, yes, the more you train, as Brad said, the more you train, the more that the higher temperatures it takes to get you to boil. If you've listened this far, take a moment before moving on. Not to agree with anything that I've said, but to notice what stayed with you. These conversations aren't meant to provide answers that you can memorize. They're meant to sharpen your judgment, to clarify your responsibility, and to help you think clearly about moments that don't allow time for thinking. If this episode raised questions, that's the point. If it made you more cautious rather than confident, that's a good thing. And if it didn't resonate with you, you don't need to force it. Preparation is personal, and it has to align with who you are and what you're responsible for. You don't need to do anything after this. Just carry the questions with you and pay attention to how you see the world this week. We'll continue the conversation next time.